Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar on the final project, Bringing It All Together. I'm your History 113-114 Learning Community Facilitator, Natalie Sweet, and I'll be taking you through this presentation today. In Chapter 12 of your e-materials, you're going to see all three of the milestone projects that you've been working on throughout this term combined together into one document. Now, this is the time to revisit those milestones and to take your instructor's comments into consideration. If you've been following along with us in past webinars, hopefully you've already been applying this feedback to your paper as you go along. But if you have not as of yet, week 7 can be a great time to begin to implement that feedback. And as a reminder to you, work within the templates that are in the e-materials as you edit. Don't pull those milestones out separately and be working on them within a separate document. Instead, you do want to work within the template so that everything is properly formatted. In Chapter 12 of your e-materials, you're actually provided with quick links to the templates. Remember, Milestone 1 was your thesis and event description. Milestone 2 included your trends, and Milestone 3 included evidence to support your thesis. Remember too, if you want to visit past webinars on these specific milestones, or if you want to watch the previous webinar on how all of these milestones fit together within your final project, remember you can go to my YouTube channel for Natalie Sweet. It's provided within our learning community. You can go to the YouTube channel and you can access any of the past webinars that I've posted on these subjects. Now, as you begin to do the review process and as you look through your instructor's comments, make certain that you set priorities. In many instances, students become caught up with making grammatical checks, particularly if their instructors pointed out areas within their submissions where things needed to be adjusted. But keep in mind, for your final project, your writing score amounts to a minimal portion of the project as a whole. While it's important to make certain that things like contractions are addressed or stray typos, overall, what your instructor is looking for is to gauge your understanding of the topic that you are writing about and of your analysis of that topic. So don't become caught up in only making grammatical corrections. The content is the most important point of this assignment. So how do you go about checking the content? Well, first, as you read through your work, ask yourself this. Overall, does each paragraph work to help my reader understand my topic? And in other words, is your work coming together to help the thesis? Does your thesis include each of the claims that I defend within the body of my paper? Is everything in your paper working together to prove that thesis that you made? Likewise, are there locations within your paper where you are vague? And this is a good rule of thumb that I always give out for determining whether or not you are including enough detail or being clear enough within your paper. A lot of times when we write, we know that our instructors are reading our work and that they're experts on these topics. But one way to make certain that you always have appropriate detail within your papers is to imagine that you are presenting your paper to someone who, while they have an interest in your topic, has absolutely no idea about the background and they want you to help them understand the topic. So, if someone was reading this who knew nothing about your topic, would they be able to follow your argument and understand the subject after reading your paper? This can be a great time to have a family member or a friend either read through or hear your paper read by you. Then listen to their questions that they may have after the reading. You may see that there are areas where you need to tighten up your evidence or where you need to make claims more explicit. Next, you want to check the evidence that you used within your paper for balance. Remember, At least 2 primary and 2 secondary sources that have been provided to you and are not from outside sources should be used within your paper. So ask yourself, have you used at least 2 primary sources? Then ask, have you over or underutilized those sources? In other words, have you just used a random quote or a random piece of information from within your sources? Does the quote or the information that you pull out work to specifically be evidence for that thesis statement that you made at the beginning of your paper? And then ask yourself the same question when you begin to use your secondary sources. Have you used at least 2 secondary sources throughout your paper? And have you over or underutilized those sources? Next, you want to ask, have I relied too heavily on my e-materials? Remember that your e-materials should only amount to 10% of the citations that are used within your paper. They shouldn't go over that. They should be used sparingly, and particularly in the evidence section, you probably don't want to rely on those whatsoever. It may appear briefly within your trends or your description, but otherwise, be careful not to overly use those e-materials. Another point that we've really been hitting in these milestone webinars is the question of whether or not you should have cited. And it is really important, even though you've checked again, to go back and double check just for good scholastic practice. So again, ask yourself these questions. Did I include a direct quote from a primary or secondary source? If you did that, include a citation. Have you paraphrased ideas from your secondary or primary sources? If you did, include a citation. And finally, did you include information within your paper that you would have had no knowledge of without your primary or secondary sources to inform you? If that is the case, you need to include a citation. Once you have these elements in place, don't forget you can use the Writing Center to double check for grammatical errors. Use them to look for errors that include grammar, spelling, syntax, organization, and citations. They're a great resource, and they'll also be really good for helping you identify if your argument is coming through clearly within your paper. You may have noticed that you cannot yet download what you've completed in the Chapter 12 final project activities as a single document. And that can be particularly challenging if you want to send those off to the Writing Center. In actuality, you're going to wrap up the final project in Chapter 13 of your e-materials. And what I recommend here is that if you are really interested in having the Writing Center look at your paper as a whole this week, it could be worth it to go forward to just the final project activities of Chapter 13 to wrap everything up. In Chapter 13, you're actually going to have 2 important additions to your final project: the introduction to your paper and the conclusion to your paper. Those elements are actually not yet in place. For your introduction, it should be a paragraph that introduces your reader to your topic and that concludes with that thesis statement that you created in Milestone 1. For your conclusion, it should be a paragraph that restates your thesis statement in a new way and demonstrates that you have proven your argument. You may want to repoint out some of the evidence that you've presented throughout your paper. An important thing about the conclusion is that you don't want to include new information for your reader within the conclusion. Remember, this is really the point of your paper that brings it home and is a final nail to help show your readers how everything that you have presented is connected to one another and that it proves your thesis. Once those elements are in, sending it off to the Writing Center for feedback can be a great idea, but remember too that your learning community is also a place where you can go for feedback. In fact, after you watch this webinar, I encourage you to share either the introduction or the conclusion of your paper with the learning community. Share that paragraph. We will give you feedback on your writing. We will let you know how it reads, how it sounds. So take advantage of that very important resource. And remember too, if you have any questions simply while you're working through the e-materials, if you have questions about the readings for the week or any of the final term wrap-up items, be in touch. We will help you get through the assignment. Have a great day, and don't forget to come to the History 113, 114 learning community if you have any questions.